We bought this dresser from Facebook Marketplace for I think around $75. It's a Bassett-made dresser and has some good bones, and it was in pretty good shape as well. This week, I wasn't in the mood to do a bunch of sanding or priming. I just wanted to get right into the makeover and have fun with it. So I removed the hardware like always, and my husband cleaned it inside and out for me, while I repaired a few small chipped veneer spots. I used water to help me shape the quickwood so I wouldn't have to do much sanding at all once it was dry. While we waited for that to dry, I worked on the fun part. I cut some 1/4-inch dowels to the size of the top drawers. I'm not gonna lie, this part stressed me out so much because I was cutting smaller pieces and some of them went flying, but I managed to get them all cut without cutting myself at least. Then I quickly sanded the top 2 drawers to help the dowels stick, but also because I wanted the wood behind the dowels to be lighter in case there were gaps that showed between the dowels. Yeah, that ended up not really being necessary, but oh well. By that point, the quickwood was dry, so I lightly sanded the quickwood with 150 grit sandpaper, while my husband mixed up the paint for the dresser. Since I didn't want to mess around with sanding or priming this time, I used Heirloom Traditions paint. We went with this dark color called Abbey, and he poured it into the sprayer and mixed it with 20% water to help it spray into a perfectly fine, texture-free finish. Oh, and I got a new paint sprayer. It's just a slight upgrade from my old Wagner that I love so much and that I still will use. But since they came out with a new model, I decided to try it and see how different it is. So we got the dresser into the spray room and I tested the spray settings. I set the X boost to 5 and then the trigger paint flow setting in about the middle but closer to the trigger side. I felt good about the way that the paint came out, so I moved on to spraying the dresser. The biggest difference with this sprayer is that there is an on-off switch that keeps the motor and air going. So it helps reduce splatters when you first pull the trigger. With the older model, you just pull the trigger part of the way back to get the motor going, and then all of the way back to start spraying. Everything else, though, felt the same. After 6 minutes, I had a full coat of paint on the dresser, and then I left it to dry. So then I worked on gluing the dowels to the drawers. I used a piece of wood and clamps to help me line the dowels up straight, and I used some instant super glue to glue the dowels on. With this glue, I poured the glue onto the drawer, and then I sprayed the dowel and then put them together. Once the spray comes in contact with the glue, it all dries within seconds. It has a super strong smell though, so my windows were all open and I wore my respirator as well. When the paint was dry on the dresser, I opened up the drawers and brushed some paint onto the edges of the drawers, and then on the inside of the dresser. I don't usually worry about the inside of the dresser, but the way that this dresser was made, you can see all of the wood braces and the things when you open the drawers, so I just painted it all to make it look nicer. I ended up doing this for 2 separate coats of paint, and then before I went to bed, I sprayed one last coat of paint on the dresser to make sure everything had full coverage. Not shown, I also cleaned the sprayer. I wouldn't let this paint sit in my sprayer overnight. The next day, I had to cut the dowels on one drawer because I didn't cut those to the right size on the saw. Since this drawer is curved though, I couldn't clamp a board onto the top of the dowels to keep the dowels from shaking off when I cut them. So I tried tape and tried to put some pressure on the dowels, but that didn't work very well. And a lot of the dowels came off, so I had to glue them back on. Then I sanded the edges of the dowels to make them all flush with the drawer and make them look nice. I'm not gonna lie though, this whole dowel process was really tedious and I questioned my sanity a few times through it all. I had to glue the dowels back on a few times through it all too. Then I put the drawers back in the dresser, thinking I was going to keep them as is, but I hated the look of the wood on those top drawers. So I decided to paint them to match the dresser. But first, thankfully, I thought about drilling the hardware holes before painting, so I did that before I painted. And I messed up the first drawer. I measured the exact middle, but then realized that the way that these drawers sit in the dresser, the hardware needed to be offset a little to line up with the hardware on the drawers below. So I re-drilled after measuring 50 million more times, and then I filled the wrong hole with some quickwood. I shaped the quickwood with my scraper and some water so I wouldn't have to sand it to shape after it was dry. When the quickwood was dry, I sprayed a few coats of paint on the drawers. This time I had to wrap them in plastic to keep the paint from getting all over the drawers. Typically I would have primed, but with this dark color, I just kinda hoped for the best. And this paint doesn't need a top coat, so I wasn't as worried as normal. To finish it all off, I boiled the original hardware for a few minutes in just plain water, and then I poured them into my sink and sprinkled some Barkeeper's Friend on them. When they were cool enough that I could touch them, I scrubbed them clean with a toothbrush, and oh boy, they look so pretty now. The tarnish came right off, and pretty easily too. So here's what it looked like before, and here's what it looks like now. I love the new look. The dowels add some subtle texture that I absolutely love. I'm so glad that I painted them and it was worth the extra time. The original hardware though, I'm not 100% sure about. I think it's interesting, but if I were to keep this dresser for myself, I would change it out for something a little simpler. But what do you think? Do you like the hardware? Is the dowel look worth all of the work? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Want to turn your hobby into cash? Click the link in my comments to download the free pricing guide that we use to buy and sell furniture.